swimming pool. But last week we talked about Charlie Manson, and I think if you people read the Esquire, and if you know people have back tapes, and if you missed it, listen to that broadcast, then read Esquire, and then think about what was Mae Brussel trying to tell you about this man or this massacre that was done to effect a change in our society, an economic revolution. It's a complicated thing to get into our heads, but I think the article came out right after our broadcast.
Yes, it did.
And I really think people should try. If they want to understand what I'm saying, they should try and read it. Now, yesterday I had a conversation on the telephone with two people that I refer to on the show. One was Bernard Fensterwald. I called him because of something that was really interesting in the newspaper, and we're going to share it here, going on in the Los Angeles Police Department, and I didn't know if he saw it, and he hadn't. The Washington Post and the New York Times carried an entire article. It was in our chronicle here, but deleted 2 sentences, and we're going to read those on the air. We may as well do them right now while we're to it, because we were talking last week, I defined agent provocateur, and because of the broadcast, and so many people are listening, I got phone calls Saturday from people. Listen to KPFA in San Francisco and LA. There was this agent who was talking about the double role that he played in the Los Angeles Police Department. And all of a sudden, heads were clicking and people were remembering what we were talking about here. And how this man, his name is Mr. Tackwood, Louis Tackwood. And he called a press conference in Los Angeles. I'm sure that most of you know about it by now, but I'm going to give you a rundown in case you haven't seen the article. Louis Tackwood called a press conference in Los Angeles, and he's 28 years old. He used to be a criminal, and he gets off of heavy raps and is not arrested because he does informing work for the Los Angeles Police Department. And I've said that Charlie Manson or James Ray could get out of jail and do heavy things for our government police, the FBI, or their local police, because they're promised that they will get out of jail, and they're used for certain things. Now, Mr. Tackwood claims that the 2 Los Angeles police departments, criminal conspiracy section and the special investigative section, are guilty of dirty tricks and murdering, and that they're out against all the militants, whether they be black or white. And he said he had prior knowledge that criminal conspiracy section had prior knowledge of the Marin County Courthouse kidnap escape attempt and George Jackson's failed escape attempt from San Quentin prison. And they let both proceed. I have to end the quote here to make a comment that my research shows me that there was every reason to believe that they knew about George Jackson and that the Attica thing was set up, because coming from New York, prison guards and members of the prison are saying they couldn't have just taken that prison and dug those trenches and moved the way they did without the guards knowing it. The guards let it happen. And who was the hero of Attica when it was all over? A lot of people think Rockefeller is not a hero. He is. That was like a joust, I call like a middle-aged type, where they used to do King Arthur's court. You proved your manliness, through these acts of murder, or like in wartime, your generals. Rockefeller proved that he was among the men when he could do this act. He all of a sudden got in the good graces of the wealthiest Republicans who had their annual dinner in New York, and he got standing ovation for his decision. And now he's among Reagan and Agnew and Connolly and the really big boys. He's a man among men where the money counts. And he's invited. Now he's on the real circuit. He's no more liberal. If Chase National Bank and all their doings with oil in the Congo and Vietnam can be called liberal, they thought Rockefeller was a liberal, but he turned out to be a man. But getting back to the Los Angeles Police Department, and this informer is saying they had prior knowledge. I know they did, and they also gave that gun to George Jackson. I've mentioned that here on the show. The guard stood there while it was handed to him. Now, this agent is saying that they funneled money through himself. He was the man who gave Ron Karenga, head of a U.S. organization, money if the weapons would be used to kill the Black Panthers. Tackwood said that the officers had instructions to make controversial telephone calls. He made one August 18, 1965, that there were guns stashed in the Black Muslim mosque. There were no weapons there, but he was to call and make that call. He alleged that Melvin Cotton Smith, the principal witness in the current trial of 13 Black Panthers, was a police informer an agent provocateur long before December the 8th, when the raid on the Panther headquarters was made, and that Smith turned state's evidence. He claims that the Los Angeles Police Department and the FBI have a special squad to provoke violence at the 1972 Republican National Convention, which will be blamed on leftists, the object to create a situation which would permit the president to invoke emergency powers and arrest and detain political activists. End the quote here, but I want to go off and say this was the remark that people called me about on the telephone, and said, you've been saying this all along, that these provocateurs of the throwing the rocks at Nixon in San Jose, or the Oda massacre, or the Manson massacre, everything, the killing of Martin Luther King, all of these things are done at election time to gain effect and put certain people into power. The killing of Robert Kennedy and John Kennedy was to take them out of power. That was to remove them drastically, but the other was to effect changes. And this brought phone calls to the House, from people who said, this is what you're saying, that this group put on costumes and dress like the radicals and mingle with the radicals and bring the guns, and that gives the chance for repression that Richard Nixon wants. He charged that he had worked in the San Francisco Bay Area as an undercover agent and spied on militants and spied on the blacks. And it said when Tackwood disappeared in mid-September, after making these allegations, he fired off letters to the district attorney Joseph Bush and Evel Younger and John Mitchell. He made a lot of these charges against these particular people and demanded an investigation of what was going on. And Tackwood approached the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, and Newsweek magazine, and they began to investigate Tackwood's disappearance. He made the allegations, and then he disappeared, and they wanted to go into what they called the San Diego Plan. Now, Tackwood's credibility has been questioned, but they've given him a polygraph test, and they have found that much of what he said is true. And he claimed that he has done a lot to put a certain defendant on death row, that he was used as a witness in a trial. I mean, these are some of the allegations for the people who didn't read yesterday's Chronicle. He said the two black Berkeley City councilmen corroborated that he had worked in their campaign, and that he claims he was placed there as an undercover agent. A motel manager remembers him being registered with two white men who were C-22 agents, and Tackwood claims it was at the time of the election campaign in Berkeley that he was sent to spy on the militants. The motel manager says he was there with these two white people. Tackwood is a black member of the Los Angeles Police Force. He said in April 1970 he was used and considered a reliable witness to put a man who is now on death row, a defendant on death row. He said the newsmen discovered that he did have a tap telephone that he talked about with an extension in the Los Angeles Police Department, so he could talk to people and then their information would go to the police department and he could turn them in. Now, in this newspaper article, there's a lot of allegations about the Los Angeles Police Department and the squad and the George Jackson breakthrough, and he mentioned the black militant training center in Santa Cruz he infiltrated. There was a prominent black man that was murdered in Santa Cruz, and I'll do a story about that if I have time next week.
You're listening to Dialogue Assassination with Mae Brussel. This is KLRB Stereo FM, Carmel by the Sea.